Welcome everyone. It's wonderful to be here to have over 100 people online already. So yeah, welcome. First up, I'd like to acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Aotearoa Nation, upon whose ancestral lands our campuses at UTS now stand. I'd also like to pay respect to the elders, both past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for these lands. So we've had a welcome to Hero and Sarah, and as Jess was saying, we're going to have a more conversational style today. Probably easier with 4 people, but with 3 people. But I'm sure that Sarah and Hero are going to be really enlightening in what they've got to say. So I'm aware that we've probably got some international people or participants with us today as well. And so just a couple of things I'd like to mention, that one of the things that we'll probably be talking about a bit is CALL, and CALL is our Council of Australasian University Librarians. And CALL actually negotiates the vast majority of the read and publish agreements that we have in Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. So that's very important. And we're lucky to have Hero, who is actually the chair of the Content Procurement Committee as part of that. And Hero is going to give us a little bit of an update in a second. But I'm also aware that many of you are probably very familiar with read and publish agreements, but some of you may not be. So we're going to have just a speed round here of busting some myths, because maybe there are some myths that you still believe in that we want to bust. So Hero and Sarah, have you heard of some common things that you're hearing around the traps that you'd like to bust?
There's a few, isn't there, Hero?
You're welcome to go first, Sarah.
Oh, okay. Thanks, Hero. I attended a research committee meeting here not that long ago at Griffith, and gave an update on our read and publish agreements and progress in that area. And straight away the hand went up and they said, but Sarah, aren't these read and publish agreements like aimed at the lower leveled journals? And I remained calm. It's like, no, you can put the trust in the CALL that we are negotiating some fantastic opportunities with publishers and vendors to really get those quality journals. In fact, I've got the stats here because I rattled it off in the meeting, saying like we've got 3,700 Q1 and 2,000 Q2 ranked journals as part of our read and publish agreement. So just constantly squashing myths like that is really helpful to progress understanding. Yeah. As one Hero.
Yeah, and there are, as you say, Sarah, probably hundreds, but I think you've called out a really important issue, I think, from a communication and advocacy space that's not unique to read and publish agreements, but it's really addressing those misconceptions around open access equaling predatory or lower quality journals. And I think, we all experience that sort of feedback from various parts of the academic community. And I think we really need to continue our focus on ensuring that people understand that, open access is not necessarily related to predatory behavior. And there's plenty of predatory behavior in the commercial for-profit and closed publishing context as well. I think I want to kind of perhaps offer one of a myth that might be slightly more controversial, and that is that read and publish agreements aren't working. Now, I want to sort of qualify that in a sense, Liz. I think read and publish agreements haven't worked from the perspective of transitioning or transformation. If we want to genuinely transform the system, that needs a lot more thinking. But I think what read and publish agreements have actually been terrific in terms of accelerating open access publishing in our region in particular, but globally. And I think you just have to look at the COKI data, that tracks research output publication over time, and you can just see, from the commencement of our read and publish agreements, just how much more open access publishing is occurring at no additional cost for the sector across the region. I think open access agreements and the read and publish agreements have made OA easy for academics. And I think certainly from my own institution's perspective, they've really helped to catalyze a whole range of new conversations with academics and senior university leaders around issues with scholarly publishing, and in particular, the issues associated with commercial and for-profit models. So I think from that perspective, read and publish agreements have really assisted us to collectively engage our community and set the scene and set the foundations for these next round of negotiations that do require us, and I think we absolutely have an imperative to be much more ambitious in our negotiation objectives and goals, and our commitment to resetting the conversation with publishers to ensure that we are building a much more sustainable offering for the future. I would say just one other thing, and perhaps we'll kind of touch on this a little bit later, Liz, is that from a success perspective, the read and publish agreements, certainly at Deakin, have really arrested the very steep trajectory of APC expenditure that we were observing across the organisation. So I think they have enabled more of our research to be published openly, while also containing and constraining costs, particularly APC expenditure in the wild. So it means that we are getting more OA for our money. Do we need to get better value out of our agreements? Absolutely, and we can kind of talk about that in a minute. And I think the final point, of course, is that read and publish agreements aren't the end point. So, I think they've been a really fantastic tool. And now our challenge is to think about what that next generation of read and publish agreements is going to be. And I can need to stop gesticulating so wildly because Zoom is picking up my gestures, and apologies for that. Let me see if I can switch that off.
Sometimes I gesticulate so wildly that my smartwatch says that I'm doing a workout.
That's awesome.
So I'll try and keep that down today too. That was really interesting, actually, with what you were both saying, and I can definitely relate to that at UTS. Not that I'm a panel member, but just jumping in there with with what you were saying about measuring success as well, and looking at things through that lens, and the rate of, or the amount of conversation that's happening, I think is very, very interesting. So here I would like to continue with you as the chair of the Content Procurement Committee, and let us know what's different about the call negotiations this year, and are there any insights or hot tips that you can give us about what's going on or might be coming up, if you can?
Very good question, Liz. So thanks for that. I think as we've communicated to call council already, this year we are taking a very new and I would say a much more robust sector-wide approach to the negotiations. So we've been working in partnership with Universities Australia and Universities NZ to really position these negotiations from a sector-wide perspective. A big part of that is the establishment of the new Call OA Negotiation Strategy Committee, which is now affectionately known as COANSC, which will be chaired by a Vice-Chancellor, nominated by UA and comprising senior academics from across both Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. And the role of that committee will really be to inform our strategy around negotiations and ensure that the deals that we are negotiating on behalf of the region truly reflect the needs of the academic community. So I think that's going to be a really terrific change to the way that we have approached negotiations in the past. Because of the nature of read and publish or open access agreements, we're not just talking about library subscriptions anymore. And so obviously the implications for our agreements are wide ranging for the research community. And so it's from that perspective that we really wanted to make sure that we are embedding the academic community in those negotiations, having the voice of academics directly at the table, at the negotiation table, and ensuring that the objectives that we are setting forth for the deals really do reflect the needs of libraries and the academic community. We're also in the process, as colleagues may have seen, of going through an ACCC notification process, which will really provide formal legal protection for call from a collective bargaining perspective. And so that's really an important part of our maturation of the consortium's operation. I think in terms of the negotiations themselves, we've articulated 4 high-level objectives that I'm happy to share. We can't kind of get into the details of the negotiations, but I think the 4 high-level objectives, I think, are important for the community to understand where we're going with these and what we're seeking to achieve. The first negotiation is around ensuring transparent, fair, sustainable, and equitable value. And a big part of that is addressing the opaque legacy pricing that our agreements are currently based on. Members who are attending the panel today may or may not be aware that most of our agreements, the price that institutions pay for many of our subscription agreements, are still based on our print expenditure in 1995.
Crazy.
Yeah, we'll just let that sit for a minute. So whatever we were spending with publishers in 1995 to buy print journals has been the basis on which our, yearly renewals and yearly increases have been based upon, which bears no relationship. If you think about the changes in higher education in Australia and Aotearoa over, the last, God, how many even years is that? The sector is completely different, and more importantly, institutions have changed very, very dramatically. So that legacy pricing is deeply problematic from an equity perspective across the sector, and bears no relationship to the volume of publishing that institutions are actually now putting out. So we really want to address that through the negotiations, but we also want to ensure that the negotiations take into account the value and labour that is provided by our academic community as part of that value production chain. And we also need to factor in the publisher economies of scale that they benefit from. So I think there's a lot in that we're working through from a negotiation and agreement perspective. But fundamentally, we do need to ensure that these agreements are sustainable and transparent for the sector so that we can demonstrate responsible use of public funds as it relates to the agreements that we're negotiating. The second objective that we're setting for is around maximising OA publishing options, and I'm sure we'll talk about this a lot later, but the frustration and the uncertainty that caps in open access agreements create for the academic community and for the library community are completely unsustainable. So we really need to move to agreements that are fully inclusive and uncapped so that we simplify the experience for our academics and provide certainty around people's publishing options. The third objective is around innovative agreement models. And I think it's clear that we want to move away from APC-based agreements. We want to move away from read and publish agreements, and we want to move to agreements that are much more based on the services that are provided and paying a fair price for those services. We also need to look at how do we negotiate agreements that don't assume or incentivize unwarranted growth in scholarly publishing, because I think it's very well established now that more articles does not equal better science. And then the fourth objective that we're putting forward in these negotiations is advancing the transition to full OA. So we want to fundamentally shift what we're paying for in the agreements, but we also want to make sure that publishers are demonstrating their commitment to shifting their business models and moving to more sustainable and equitable OA agreement models in future. I will just, I'm aware that I've talked a lot, Sarah, so I'll hand over to you if you've got any comments, but I think the only other point I want to make on that is that we need to be clear that sustainability in these agreements is in everyone's interests. It's in the publisher's interests as much as it is in our interests. No one wants a cancellation of these agreements because they're an integral part of enabling research across our region. But we need to ensure that publishers understand that meeting our needs and our objectives and our interests is also in theirs, because that means a future constructive partnership and hopefully, ongoing and continuous agreements that are good for the sector and also good for publishers. I think the
Yes.
second question, Liz, was can I share anything from behind the scenes?
Oh yeah, were there any hot tips? I'm sure that you would have put them in, but just in case, Hero.
Look, just the only thing that I would add is that we've done a lot of work with Call Council, and I think what's been really terrific is the level of engagement and alignment that there is amongst council around those four objectives. And I think, what we've got is the benefit of time. So we've been observing lots of stuff happening in the international context, and I think the timing really feels right for our region now. I think to have a more robust and ambitious agenda around the negotiations. I think we're really able to leverage the success that we've seen internationally and then play our part regionally in shifting that conversation. I think it's absolutely clear that our sector can't sustain the ongoing increase in costs associated with publishing. And so I think I've just been really delighted by the conversations that I've been having to ensure that we are taking forward a series of objectives that genuinely do reflect the ambitions of our sector.
Yeah, it's wonderful to hear some of those initiatives that have come out, Hero, that they're going to make a very big difference. Yeah, really congratulations to everyone who's been involved in those. I'm just going to flip to a question that's relevant to what you were talking about, Hero, from Em at Swinburne. Can we hope for a new generation of read and publish agreements that have author rights retention or author-owned copyright and specific CC licensing guaranteed? We've been observing very alarming assertions of publisher bespoke licensing and copyright ownership in OA publishing that are not compliant with funder policies.
Yeah, Em, absolutely. That is a critical issue. I mean, I think there have been all sorts of really concerning, I would say, misuse of licenses or misinterpretations of licenses, and that's something that Call are very conscious of in terms of their these negotiations and other engagements with publishers to ensure that we do preserve author rights and hold publishers accountable for implementing Creative Commons as it was intended. So my answer is yes, that is absolutely part of our negotiation strategy. We're looking at rights retention. We've got a new model license that we're exploring, and that embeds in it rights retention.
Yeah, fantastic. Great news to hear. Thinking more about what you've been doing in this space and as you've been looking internationally at different models, are there things in the international space that have inspired you or that you've taken to introduce as part of the read and publish negotiations, or even things that you've been doing locally?
I could jump in here a bit. It's like I found this hard to answer, Liz. I think about, to tell the truth, because actually, like internationally, it's just what you're saying here. That's locally, Australia, Aotearoa, New Zealand, it's now our turn. So I'm excited about this year and what's going to happen. In fact, when the Call Council and Hero reached out to the Call Council to talk about what we're doing the next 6 months, I was lucky. I was in a good position. I just arrived as University Librarian at Griffith. I had a chance to meet with my DVCR and DVCE, and that was the first thing I brought up. I was like, hey, this is what Call is going to be doing. And they were excited. So they're excited that we're a big social justice university, of course. So they are very excited that we're progressing this way. And Hero, you mentioned like Hoki before, like when lucky the Call Council was in Perth recently, and just saw the amazing work that Curtin University are doing to sharing the impact of open throughout the world, and just seeing how this big wave, it's like you're saying as well here, I agree with you that just the impact of read and publish agreements is, you can just see this increasing of open. And so I don't have a specific answer, Liz. I'm just generally, and like looking at the dashboards. I remember a long time ago, I remember Bob Garrity, the University Librarian at Monash, he shared another dashboard. I think it was the ESCA registry. And just when you go into that dashboard and just again compare Australia, the US and UK, it's pretty exciting just to see this big wave of open. So just generally excited. Sorry for the vague vague answer, Liz and Hero.
No, not at all, not at all. Just a convo, Sarah.
I would say, Liz, what's kind of inspiring us. I mean, both Angus Cook, who's obviously the Director of Content Procurement at Call, Arthur Smith at Call, myself are very deeply engaged with a range of international groups and are in frequent conversation with international counterparts in the UK, via GISC, as well as a lot of the kind of Northern European countries, including Switzerland and then Austria and the Scandinavian countries in particular. And I think they're, from my perspective, very much leading the way in terms of both approaches to negotiations, but also in terms of the objectives that they're setting for the new agreements. I think GISC in particular, if anyone's not yet had a look at their next generation open access principles, definitely worth digging in and having a look. And, they're really pushing the desire to move to more like non-volume based agreements for open access publishing, which I think is, absolutely where we need to go. I think it's very clear that APC based agreements actually re-entrench a whole range of the existing problems that we're all very, very aware of, and we need to think about how can we move away from those APC based kinds of open access agreements to ensure greater equity and sustainability for the sector. So I would certainly encourage people to have a look at that. Interestingly, GISC are negotiating with the big 5 publishers this year as well, simultaneously. So it'll be interesting to see the shape and size and nature of those agreements as further details are released, to see, how willing publishers are to kind of come to the table and rethink, rethink their business models to better reflect the values of the sector. So it's a bit of a to be confirmed or to be determined. But would definitely encourage people to have a look at the GISC content at the moment, because I think that really sets a very clear picture for where Europe is trying to head.
Yeah, really, the world is all in this together.
Yeah.
Everyone, it's so interesting how everyone's negotiating with the same publishers and getting different outcomes, I guess.
Yeah.
So
I mean, I agree, Liz, and it is that, we will affect more change by, working together and trying to kind of align on those objectives. Obviously, the national contexts are different, and that will also always impact the nature of the agreements or some of the specific components. But I think everyone is aware that scholarly communication and publishing needs reform or transformation. And the only way that we will affect the kind of change that, I think we all believe we need is through, sharing and global alignment.
Yeah. So moving from international down to local now. So at your institutions, or maybe institutions that you've worked at previously, tell me about how your library or your university is doing anything that might be a bit different to others in this read and publish or the APC space, or if you've tried anything different to support disciplines or researchers who aren't benefiting as much from the current deals.
I'll jump in, Hero, so take it. I got excited here at Griffith for a number of reasons, of course, but we found that even though Call has been creating these amazing resources like the Lib Guides with information up to date on like the cap levels and where we are with read and publish agreements, there's always, of course, academics that want a bit more or something different to what they're used to. So I was asked by an academic again at a research committee, can the library please create like a different spreadsheet with like up-to-date information on read and publish agreements just for us? And I'm like, okay, I'm going to tell the team this, but off I go. And the team here created this magnificent Power BI dashboard that it's taking in all the amazing information from call, but it's putting in those extra elements that's the researchers are asking for. So we have information about the quartiles, because that answered that question. That was at the same meeting when I was asked, like, the quality of the journals in the read and publish agreements. And we're putting on these other different pieces of information, this dashboard, that's just helping academics really understand the impact that each one of these journals is making with those cap levels and things like that. So we're testing that out with the community here at Griffith, and no doubt be happy to share how that's done too. But yeah, it's that constantly trying to promote read and publish agreements to our researchers, but meeting their needs at the same time, using the great resources that call is sharing with us, so that we can all, we're using the same data.
Mhm. Probably at the Deakin perspective, Liz, as I mentioned in my sort of opening gambit, I mean, we do a lot of work to track APC expenditure across the institution, and that's actually been a really fantastic tool to kind of sharpen people's minds around why we need to care about this, because, you know, the data was really showing a very steep trend of year-on-year increases with APC expenditure outside of library budget. And it was clear that most of that expenditure was completely unmanaged. You know, it was just operationally being spent across the institution. So I think partly using that information to drive conversations has been very, very useful. And you mentioned in your opening about Deakin's new open research statement. So a lot of that conversation then resulted in the creation of our open access task force that was looking at how can we actually implement sustainable and also equitable approaches to open access across our institution, looking at a whole range of issues in terms of policy, service, but also funding. I think our open research statement says absolutely clearly that, you know, we encourage people to make use of call agreements, and we don't support the payment of article processing charges in otherwise subscription journals or hybrid journals. So it's a very clear statement from the university. I think that's been really effective again at driving conversations. We, like everyone, are really grappling with, though, how do we actually better support people who aren't well served by current agreements? And I think a big issue is how do we actually support open monograph publishing, noting that, you know, book charges are in the tens of thousands of dollars as opposed to just thousands of dollars. We don't have any answers to that yet, but we do have a project at Deakin to have a look at, you know, whether there is scope to create some kind of, you know, fund of last resort that can be used to strategically support disciplines or academics or researchers who aren't well served by traditional grant funding channels or call, read and publish agreements. I think the only other thing that I kind of want to throw into the mix is, you know, from a call perspective, once we get through the big renegotiation of the really major agreements, and if we are able to achieve cost savings for institutions, one of the things that we're seeing internationally are people repurposing savings through effective negotiations to support local or diamond OA initiatives. So I think that's something I'm certainly keen to explore at my own institution's level. If we are able to, you know, make savings here and there through either strategic negotiations or other strategies, can we actually then, from a principles and values-based perspective, reinvest some of that money to support other disciplines or more scholar-led publishing initiatives?
Mm, very interesting to hear both, you know, both of your perspectives on that and what you're undertaking there. Just a follow-on question, Rachel in the Q&A has said, are the agreements restricting bibliodiversity? Many researchers who don't have the funding to pay for APCs, the agreements are a great option. And obviously Green OA is a great alternative, but not all researchers like or understand Green OA. So what are your thoughts about the restriction of bibliodiversity with the read and publish agreements in their current form?
This is a tricky one.
I think, look, as I said before, I think that risk of, centralizing publishing in big agreements where open access agreements have been negotiated is a real risk. Are people going to choose publishing under a call agreement because they don't have to pay an APC? Quite possibly. I mean, I think that's been untested from a research perspective, but I think it is. You can imagine those scenarios where people are like, "Do I want to pay $5,000 to this journal, or can I publish for free under a call, read, and publish agreement? I'll choose that journal." I mean, it makes sense. So that's something I think we need to be really aware of, and I think there is a question mark around how do we as libraries and as a library consortium negotiate agreements with fully OA publishers to improve access, and essentially kind of make sure that we've got a range of publishers on even footing via call agreements would be my kind of response to that. I think it's something we're very aware of in the Core Content Procurement Committee. The priority this year, as I've said, is really around the big agreements because they represent such a substantial investment from the sector and also represent such a substantial volume of the sector's publishing and the region's publishing. But we absolutely, once we're through those agreements, need to turn our attention to, how do we as a library community start to support more fully and non-commercial OA publishers. Sarah?
Yeah, thanks, Hero. I was thinking too about what Rachel's saying, how not all researchers, of course, like green or understand it. And I was thinking, I mean, I know most of our university libraries have this now, is a fabulous research librarians, the form that they're in. And I know here at Griffith, our research discipline librarians are constantly speaking, networking with our researchers, trying to get them to understand that importance of like green. And here at Griffith, we have our fabulous Grow, our research online repository, but we also have Creative Works for our nitros. So we've got two options for our researchers to deposit their research into, no matter what form it is. So it's just showing researchers those options. But I had another conversation with one of the heads recently who said even like the use of read and publish just blows researchers' minds. They think because this is a whole nother foreign area. That if he asked if we could just use the word open for everything. So just trying to speak the language of the researchers, not putting our terminology onto them, but to really get them to understand those benefits for them on getting their research out there and making it open for everyone to access and use. Yep.
And there are many ways to open.
Many ways.
Yeah. So, we've been talking about researchers. So thinking about, and you've touched on this, Hero, how are the researchers at your university or the institution as a whole benefiting, do you think, from these agreements? And talking about the success, and you've touched on that, Hero, but I think that it can be difficult to measure success sometimes and impact. So yeah, how are your institutions going with that?
Do you want me to jump in, Sarah?
Oh, yeah, sure.
I think, look, as I've said, Liz, I think institutionally, researchers at Deakin are benefiting simply through easier access to OA and not being hit with additional costs in many cases. So reducing barriers to either funder compliance or generally making decisions around wanting to have their research made open. So that ease is terrific. I think we're measuring success in terms of seeing the percentage of Deakin's research published openly going up year on year, which is a big win. But we're also looking at that reduction in APC expenditure in the wild as another key metric. Obviously, all of that is balanced by the issues that researchers are experiencing, both in terms of caps and the uncertainty that they introduce, particularly as we sort of get to the tail end of the year for some of our agreements that are capped. And I think obviously coverage is another issue. So as I've kind of said, thinking about how Call can negotiate agreements with a broader range of publishers, but also ensuring that the agreements that we do have are fully inclusive so that we don't have to kind of continue that palaver around, title lists and what's in and what's out. We want to really, and I think we have an imperative to really simplify the agreements and improve the experience for researchers from that perspective. Sarah?
Here at Griffith, the same. Here we're seeing great impact on when we're measuring like success. We do it in the sense of, like, of course, budgets are a big thing across the higher education sectors everywhere at the moment. But when we share with our research committee and our DVCR that I've got a number here, cost avoidance of like $4 million thanks to read and publish agreements compared to what was being spent on APCs. Now, here at Griffith, the library don't lead APCs. They're done out in the schools, and but we get an idea of how much that their expenditure is a year, and we're doing the comparison and showing them that they don't have to go through that avenue. And when we're helping them set up a different avenue, like you said here, it's a much easier process so that they can get their research disseminated and shared with everyone in a better way.
Yes, thank you for that. I want to move on to equity, because this is something that I hear a lot around the traps and at my institution as well. So my question is, have we unintentionally created an open access system that works best for those who are already advantaged? So whether that's countries or institutions, disciplines or researchers. What do you think about that?
Yeah, this is super hard, especially again here at Griffith. Our STGs are super important to us, as everyone, I understand, but particularly I've written down here number 10, where we want to reduce that inequity across countries, and even read and publishers agreements. Like here, you were saying this at the start. They're not the perfected model but they're helping, and they're also just helping get us a little bit forward in a different direction, but it's not the ultimate goal. They're just a little speck of sand that we're moving forward. But I think other areas, such as when the NHMRC changed their policy with that research outputs, and I had a look recently that the Gates Foundation open access policy changed recently, so that they won't pay for APCs. So there's different little changes throughout the world that's helping this problem with equity, because it is unfair that only those in certain institutions like ours that have access to this opportunity with read and publish agreements, things like that. Bit vague again, Hero, but that's a super hard question, Liz. She was like, oh.
No, not vague at all, Sarah. It's just, it's so complex, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think part of the challenge for us all is kind of balancing the fact that we are representing institutions, and we need to often make decisions that are in the best interests of our institutions, while also having those considerations about where we spend our money has implications, and how do we work towards a fairer global system, while also going, but Deakin institution, we still need to publish. We still have to provide access. So we're sort of balancing sometimes some competing demands, which is tricky. But in terms of your question, have we unintentionally created a system that works better for people who are already advantaged? I mean, yes, I think so. Whether it was the old subscription model, which was as equally as problematic, or whether it's this new one where we've just kind of shifted the paywall in a sense. It's still inequitable. I think that the question then is, how do we actually negotiate models that make publishing more affordable for everyone, and critically, I think, have building in more of a sense of transparency to what we are paying, I think is really critical. Recognizing, of course, that what is affordable for one country is not going to be the same for another one. And I think, from that perspective, Call and many other library consortiums do advocate for, geo pricing, and I think the purchasing power parity is like 3Ps, purchasing power parity framework, is one of those models that look at, the local geographic and economic situations of countries in determining what is a fair price for the services that they're getting. So I think it's very clear that, handouts and waivers aren't a solution and shouldn't be the kind of go-to for commercial publishers. I think that just kind of sets up really problematic dynamics. And from my conversations with many other, chief librarians, in globally, I think there's a lot of frustration with that kind of approach taken by commercial publishers. What we want is pricing that is appropriate for regions to enable equitable access to scholarly communication and publishing. Does that mean that Australia and Aotearoa pay more? Yeah, probably. Same with many other, high income countries. We should be paying more. Does that mean we should be paying as much that commercial publishers can still make a 40% profit margin? I would say no. So, I think there's a lot of stuff in there. And addressing those kind of egregious profit margins, I think, is an issue for the sector that we do need to really, really address. As I said before, I think, ultimately sustainability in scholarly publishing and communication is to everyone's benefit. And I really hope that through these negotiations, and I know through the negotiations that are happening globally, particularly, in a lot of high income countries, that we continue to put pressure and express our desire for publishers to think through those questions of equity and affordability from a global perspective.
Here, it was interesting. Recently at the Call Vendors events, Elsevier raised with me the Indian government's new strategy that they started at the beginning of the year, like the one nation, one subscription. They just dropped that at me and a colleague, and we were just like testing the waters. But so that's really interesting that India have gone down that path. They're spending a lot of money just for those 30 international journals. Yeah, it's really interesting to see what's happening.
Now we only have a couple of minutes left, and I want to see if I can jump into one more, which is Wayne. So Wayne was the first question that came in. Is it even a problem if Read and Publish doesn't cause the landscape to flip gold? Isn't there a risk of locking independent researchers out of flagship journals if they flip gold? Maybe hybrid Read and Publish could actually be good.
That's yeah, I mean, I don't know, Hero, this one, it's like, there's so many possibilities, really, isn't there, we can go with. But thanks, Wayne. I don't know, Hero, I might get you to.
Yeah, I'm sort of happy to jump in. It's a really good question, Wayne. And of course, I mean, I agree in a sense, hybrid journals do solve that problem of allowing researchers to publish with no barrier, which is good if they're not affiliated with institutions. Yeah, I think that issue of independent researchers remains a real challenge, and how we support not just university libraries, but other research institutions to participate in agreements is another solution to that. But the citizen scientists, are a group that I think aren't well served by the current model, realistically. And I don't have a good solution for that in the short term. What I would say for the long term, I think there is globally a reasonable degree of consensus that commercial for-profit models of scholarly publishing aren't necessarily always in the best interests of science and of research. And so our ability to fund high quality and sustainable diamond offerings that, there are no barriers to reading or publishing. I mean, that has to be the long-term objective. Are we going to get there in the next couple of years? Probably not. But I think long term for the sector and for the sustainability and equity, issues that we've discussed already, moving to models that remove barriers on either side has to be our shared objective.
Thanks,
Yep.
Hero.
Yeah. And what I love about all of our conversation today, and even the questions that we haven't got a chance to get to, and I'm sorry to everyone who's asked questions, is that for me, it really comes back, Hero, to what you were talking about in the beginning about what CALL is actually doing and the approach that's being taken and the considerations to that. Because what we know is that there are all of these issues, and the answer is often no, we're not addressing these at the moment, but we're aware of them and we're building towards that. And we're taking these steps to actually make it even better and better, and it's an iterative process. So I feel so encouraged at, again, what CALL is doing in this space, because it covers so many of these things that we've been talking about. So I'm not sure who I pass back to. Is it Jess or someone else? But I personally would like to thank you, Hero and Sarah. Fantastic to get your insights on this read and publish topic, and to all the people who have asked the questions. Great questions again. Sorry we couldn't get to them, but yeah, really interesting. Thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you to Liz. Thanks, Hero. Awesome chat.